All right, so here we are for round two.
Excellent. Looking forward
Yeah,
to it.
me too. So, how about if we start off with um, each of us discussing one or more times we've experienced reinvention or engaged in reinvention and some like the lessons learned. So, actually, the first one happened really early in life. It was back before the term quarter life crisis wasn't around, and I had one. And what it was I was going to graduate school to be a wildlife biologist. And ever since I was a little kid, I quote, knew that's what I wanted to be. I grew up in an outdoorsy family, loved, loved nature, and also really loved science. But the problem was, it wasn't until I entered the master's program that it finally dawned on me that I loved learning about science, but not doing it. That like doing experiments and the repetitiveness of it was incredibly boring to me, and the I'm more of an idea person than a like operational person. So I got super depressed when I realized the thing I thought I was going to do ever since I was a little kid was not working for me. And I just want to stop for a second. You think about how many people we've met over the years, whether friends or clients who are in their 40s, 50s, who are in that boat. Like,
Exactly.
don't want to be a lawyer, accountant, nurse, whatever. And so I can still remember like it was yesterday when I reached my tipping point. My research project was radio tracking bobcat and coyote in the middle of the Maine forest. And ironically, and it's interesting to me about, and I know you and I have talked about this in other contexts, how like our soul, here's one framework way of looking at life. Like our soul puts ourselves in situations to like a crucible to force us into looking at what's working and what's not. Because I chose for my project radio tracking bobcat and coyote, which are nocturnal animals, and I'm somebody who needs a lot of sleep. So I'm in the middle of the forest in the middle of the night in the freezing cold winter. Yeah, so it's not working for me. And it was actually New Year's Eve, and it hit me. I hate this. I cannot do it any longer. And I literally got out of the Forest Service or Wildlife Service, whatever the truck was, and and stepped out, and it was super brutally cold, and I started like jumping up and down, like stamping my feet. And I was never like a melodramatic kid, but felt so frustrated and helpless. And then this horrible sense of emptiness and like feeling bereft just like washed over me. And that feeling of, I'm not this thing I thought I was, I'm not. Now, who am I? And again, I was really young. I was early to mid 20s. So it wasn't like somebody who'd done it for decades. I could only imagine. Well, no, actually, I have changed careers much later in life too. Yeah. So fortunately, I was able to compartmentalize really quickly. And I'm like, all right, now what are you going to do? And so I started sorting through. Again, I was in graduate school, so undergrad was fairly recent. I started sorting through, okay, other than the science classes, what did you like? And the classes I loved the most were psychology. And then I'm like, okay, could you do something with that? And I remember like, well, as a kid, like oftentimes other kids would come to me and share stuff. So maybe I could like do some kind of career, like where people, I'm like, I think that's called a psychologist. And so I ended up, fortunately, my mom was a school nurse, so she knew school psychologists, social workers. So I went back to Connecticut where I grew up, and she connected me with some people in different versions of helping professions for me to do informational interviews to get a sense of what might be a good fit, what's the fastest path, et cetera. So that's one of the reasons why in the career coaching, I'm such a advocate for people in terms of sure you do informational interviews and don't jump into a profession just because like you like the classes, And if you're thinking of switching professions, do some really intensive, informational interviews to see if it's a good fit. So that was one that was early on. And then just a super quick vignette that relates to one of the things we were talking about before we started recording is being open to serendipity. And you never know what action you take will open an amazing door. And so it was about a little over 7 years ago. A friend of mine that I hadn't seen in about a year or so, I reached out and said, "Hey, let's get together, reconnect." So we got together, and right near the end of our get together, she says something like, you might not be interested in this, but I thought I'd just share it with you anyway. Um, I know somebody, and I knew the person she was mentioning, who has a career counseling firm who's looking for some independent contractors. And I said, well, you know, I did 13 years as a counselor, but not career counseling. But I'm like, doesn't hurt just to talk with the person and let them know I don't have that experience. And so I reached out and we met, and she said, I could teach you the career technical side of it. I'm just mostly interested in making sure I have people who have really good like coaching and counseling skills. And I figured I really back up, figured give it a try, but also one of the things that we had talked about before, before recording about how do you pull an earlier career into this new iteration. I had so burned out on being a counselor, I thought I never wanted to do one-on-one work again. And so most of the work I've been doing the last 25 years has been speaking at events and training, but I found I really missed the one-on-one. So when I started, working at this firm, I'm like, why didn't I think of this 20 years ago? I love this. This is like so made for me. So I just wanted to give that little vignette, both in terms of it's a really meaningful example for me of you never know what single conversation you have can open a door, and also about past experience you can bring into the present. So those are mine. Go for it, my man.
Yeah, those are great. It's fun to hear them in this context. Well, I'm going to start with one I wasn't planning to say, but I think it's helpful. This will be quick, theoretically, to understand the big one that I especially want to share about. And so my first reinvention, which I didn't call a reinvention or think of it in any way in those terms, was when I was around 24 and 25, and I had already about a 5-year career as an actor, singer, dancer in New York, and I was successful. I had the lead role in the longest running musical in the world. Did 800 performances. I was getting work. I was getting work in musical theater, in television commercials, a couple small films. I clearly had some talent. People liked me, and the career was looking good. It wasn't one of those stories of can't get any work. So you're calling yourself an actor, but you never were actually paid as an actor. It's like, I'm a contractor. Oh, really? What some examples? Oh, well, I've never actually built a house. Oh, okay. So you're in name only. But I had been a working actor, successful shows and all that. But there was this feeling inside of me that this was not my ultimate destiny. Even though I knew I was good at it, I was getting regular work. I was getting recognized. I was in the San Francisco airport one time on vacation, and somebody comes up to me and says, "You're Bruce Cryer. I saw you last night, Saturday night in the Fantastics in Greenwich Village." I was like, "Whoa, that's wild." I'm in a little show. What's real fame like? I'm getting it was kind of fun, right? Who wouldn't get a charge of you're being recognized in a jet way, quite literally, and remembered my name even. That okay, that's cool. But anyway, this other part of me was feeling like this is not my ultimate destiny, and there's a lot about life I want to learn. I'm not done learning. I'm not just ready to say this is my career and this is it, because it felt like it wasn't serving enough. My spirit needed to serve. My heart wanted to educate or inspire, which I could do in acting, but it was more connected to me is what I felt I wanted. Because being an actor, I felt like, well, I'm always playing somebody else. I'm never playing myself. I'm speaking the lines of an author of a character that's not me. I may infuse me, and that's what actors do, into the roles, but it's still not me. So I just had this urge to be me in some way and work for that, but also to learn more about my well-being and spirituality and personal development. I was just really wanting to learn. So this is, remember, this is young. This is 24, 25. So not that like it's not a surprise that you would switch. So it's not so much a reinvention, but I'm telling it because at the time it was a big deal. I mean, my girlfriend and I, she was a very successful actress in her own right. We stopped all work. We stopped with our agents. Our families were both like, "What are you doing? And you're moving to California? Okay, now we're nervous." So everything obviously worked out, but it was a very conscious decision that I needed to grow in a whole new area of my life, and I trusted that it would work out. I didn't feel like I needed a whole financial plan. I had some unemployment coming in because I'd been in a long running show, so I was able to collect a little bit of that, and so we had some resources. We weren't destitute, so that was also important. Fast forward 30 some years later, 34 years later. And I go through this 2 year period of major medical issues, cancer, surgery for cancer, treatments to make sure that cancer would never return. And knock on wood, I'm 15 years cancer free. But I started getting staph infections. The staph spread to my blood. That's life threatening. So now I'm dealing with two uh, parallel life threatening conditions. I heard the word life threatening a few too many times, and that's a whole another conversation. But obviously, I got through all of it, but it wasn't over with the staph infection. So I ended up my hips, which had already been bad for some time from scoliosis and running on roads for too long, they were now getting much worse because my body was fighting all this stuff and I couldn't do a lot of what I was normally doing. And so the reality was I was going to have to look into hip replacement, which I knew would happen one day. Meanwhile, my mother passed away. Meanwhile, I was having all these feelings about I've been part of this incredible organization called HeartMath for 20 years, one of the creators of it, one of the founders of it, very identified with it, was CEO of the for-profit side at the time this was all happening. And part of me is saying, are you sure you're supposed to stay doing this? And ultimately, I realized, no, I'm not supposed to keep doing this. And I wasn't sure what I was going to go to next. So the reinvention for me at this phase, and of course, now I'm in my 50s, not in my 20s, like I was for the first one. Now the reinvention was a bigger deal because I was not a kid anymore. And yet there was a part of me I was able to isolate inside myself that kind of knows, no, you're supposed to do something else. You don't have it all figured out yet, and that's okay. You don't have to figure it out. You don't necessarily have to have a plan yet. In fact, a plan might be the wrong thing to do, because what you need to do right now, this is what I kind of keep in mind. I was going through procedures, I was going through treatments. I had a lot of time lying on my back to reflect on stuff. And there was a lot of time and space. I was kind of creating the space to reflect. And more, it felt like there is another life waiting for me that I still need to create. And it will involve stepping down as CEO and pulling back from most of everything I had done, the management at least, of that organization for so long. I wasn't 100% clear on what I was going to do next because I was about to have a second hip replacement done. I had had one done already. Now a second one was scheduled, and there would be rehabbing from both. And now I was not on treatments anymore. It was almost 2 years later. So the treatments relative to the cancer. So that was kind of okay. The cancer seemed to be, this is not a worry anymore. You're fine. Staph infections wasn't a worry anymore. You're fine. Now you just got to learn how to walk again. It's fun to be able to laugh about it. It's so fun to be able to laugh about it because it's pretty far in the past now, and it's turned out so well. Because of course, what happened is, not only did I learn how to walk again, I realized I could actually dance again, and dancing became a huge part of my therapy, a huge part of my healing. And so I was allowing myself the time to really explore what I needed, what was going to be the next step. Everybody doesn't always have that luxury. But I decided, for me, given everything I was going through, this was heavy duty. I mean, and my marriage was ending. I forgot to throw that one in there. So every part of my life was kind of up for question. And luckily, I felt a strong enough connection to my own heart and to my own sense that you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. You're not only a CEO of a wellness kind of a company institute. That's not all that you are. I didn't at that moment think, well, maybe you ought to start singing again, or maybe you ought to start dancing again. I didn't have any of those thoughts. I just felt like I've accumulated enough knowledge, enough experience. There was so much that I have learned, and I have such a good network. I'll figure it out. So there was conscious to the point that you and I had before we started talking. I was conscious of, I'm not throwing everything out from my past, not at all. As I got into the world of work and found a skill as a speaker, I realized, man, thank goodness I had all those years as a dancer, as an actor, as a singer. I'm very comfortable in front of an audience. I can actually also just talk to them as me, but I had that comfort. Like, okay, make it weird. Have none of the technology work properly. Great, then I get to be improv. So I realized that skill of being quick on my feet and learning how to be with an audience served me extremely well. I didn't throw all that out. That became part of my newer identity when I got involved with nutrition and wellness, and then ultimately with HeartMath. So those skills were not gone. Life lessons I had learned were not gone. So here I was now, 20 years into HeartMath, facing all these kind of the recovery from all these things I was going through, let alone the emotional recovery from the loss of my mother, the ending of my marriage. There's a lot of healing I need to do, and I think many of us, there is some in the impulse to reinvent, there is something needing some healing. Doesn't mean it's been a tragedy necessarily, but it could be 20 years of a declining of a job that's declining in its interest and in its value. And so that creates an accumulation of significant stress in people. It may not have led to an actual breakdown, but if you've been in an unhappy job, let alone an unhappy marriage, unhappy relationship for years, even if it hasn't turned into a measurable problem, trust me, there's some healing that's got to go on there. And so I just bring that up because I didn't, as I made the announcement, I was stepping down as CEO. It wasn't like I was moving into another thing. In fact, people would ask me, so what are your plans? I said, to heal. Oh, you're right. I got another hip replacement surgery going on in a month. But what are your plans? I said, did you hear? I got my second hip replacement. That's my plan. Get that done. Start healing. Let's see what unfolds. I can't figure it all out right now. The me I am right now is not the me that will be present. But I also was conscious that I'm not throwing away all that I've done. And what I learned fairly quickly was I was in high demand. I was no longer CEO. A lot of people knew me. They knew me as a skilled speaker, as an educator. And they're like, "Oh, you're available now? Well, you could come work with us. We'll hire you full time right now." No, not quite. So those are the key themes that I wanted to mention is that when I wasn't throwing out my past. In fact, the more I realized there are incredible lessons I have learned as a CEO for 11 years, let alone the 20 years of helping even create a company from scratch. Wasn't all me doing it. There were 30 of us doing it, but I learned a lot. And the way of thinking that I had developed in that process was very valuable. A lot of people were curious, well, what's your input about this? In fact, one time I was talking to a company that wanted me to be on their team. And they said, so what do you want your, like in the C level of, I wasn't interested in being a CEO. They said, what would your title be? I said, Chief, we need him in the room, officer. Because I realized in all the years, 30 plus years in business, in management of different companies, I learned a lot about a lot of aspects of business. Some things I'm really good at, like business development, education, strategy, people relationships, communication. Things I'm not good at, like operations, but I appreciate the importance of it and make sure I have really good people doing it because I know that's not my skill. So get good people because you need that around you. So I knew a lot. So all that I learned, even if it wasn't going to be in a similar job, and I didn't even know what it was, where I was going, all that I've learned all through the years was incredibly valuable. And I think a lot of people don't give themselves enough credit for how much they have learned because the job has been so unfulfilling for the last year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. But wait a minute, that doesn't mean you haven't been learning. You've been learning this whole time in all kinds of ways you're probably not giving yourself enough credit for.
Absolutely. There are a couple of things you said I'd love for us to um, dig a little deeper on. Um, and I think also in terms of discounting what they've learned, there's that natural tendency for most of us, like if something comes easily to you, you think it's easy for everybody else, so it's no biggie that you're really good in that area. And it's like, no, the very fact that it is easy for you means that's one of your like your superpowers. Um, a couple of things you said that really stood out for me, um, that I think are such uh, important messages for people. So one is your unwillingness to rush to closure. So to say it in a positive way, your willingness to be in the unknown.
Yes.
And you know how often that's so hard for humans, you know, because certainty is way more comfortable than uncertainty. So I don't know if is there anything else you want to say about how you helped yourself be comfortable with being in the unknown and not rushing to take the first job that, you know, somebody offered you, or, you know, give yourself a immediate deadline? Any,
Yes, that's huge. And like as I said in my first transition out of actor, out of New York, out of living on the East Coast and moving to the Bay Area and like without a job, you know, there was a lot of unknown, but I was also young and I had a partner and she was dynamic and we were kids. You know, it felt like we were kind of kids going on an adventure. Let's move to California. It didn't feel that risky, right? And we had some money saved, especially she did. And so that wasn't that big a deal. 30 years later, when I'm doing it again, after all that I just shared, it was different, but I still had a sense of, well, I've got some financial resources that'll make it easier so I don't have to rush. I think where the challenge comes in is when there are 3D, where there are practical real world challenges that are causing extra pressure. So when the career change is complicated by I can't stop working to figure this out. I don't have the luxury of taking 6 months to try something else. I've got to, if that's a reality, which it can be. I'm in a situation now. I won't over you. You know more details than I'll share at the moment. But I moved back to the Bay Area after being on the East Coast for 7, 8 years, living in several different places: New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Texas, Florida. I was purple. I toured through very prominently blue states and prominently red states. And in that process, realized I needed to come home to the Bay Area. And I came home a few months ago. Home meaning the area that I love and I've spent most of my life in. But I didn't have a place to live. I didn't have a job that I was coming back to. So I had even more unknown. On the other hand, I have family here. I have my daughter here. I have a lot of other family members. I have friends, some of whom I've known for over 40 years that are here. I met a lot of new people in the last year or two of coming back and visiting. So I have a significant network I was coming back to. And that was a super big deal. To go into a big change without a support system is really a challenge. So, and for me, being back in Florida for a year and a half, I did not have a support system there. I had a couple of friends that I could talk fairly openly with, but that's really different than feeling like you got different people that kind of serve different roles in your life. You know, some that are really friends, like a brother almost, and others that are more you can bounce ideas off, whatever. But that was a big deal for me because I was really coming back to the unknown in the sense of not knowing how I was going to support myself, not knowing where I was going to live. There's a lot of unknown. At a time, I left Florida 2 weeks after, no, 9 days after the election, presidential election. So there was all that uncertainty of what's it going to be like, on top of the fact that I was coming back to a gigantic unknown. And for me, it's really noticing where anxiety is suddenly crept in. Anxiety about the future, like how am I going to pay for blah 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 this month or over the next 6 months or whatever it is, or whatever the anxieties are. And a lot of times that's the kind of thing that the anxiety is about when there's a career change or a thought about reinvention is how am I going to make it all work financially? You know, how's that going to happen? And so part of what I've always done is, well, I've made it this far. I've never collapsed financially. I've always, something is always, even when there've been really thin times, slim times, something has come back. So there's this word called faith, but it's not just about faith. It's about face the reality. You've always been taken care of to some degree. It's not because I've ever been rich either, not financially rich. So kind of remembering, wait a minute, things have always worked out for you. So, but the more you are in fear, the more you give into the anxiety, the harder it is for the things to work out. Because if you're putting out, if I am putting out too much fear, that's affecting every interaction I have with people that might be kind of wanting to pay me to hire them, to hire me, to be their mentor or be their coach or attend a class. And if I'm putting out a vibe of fear, even if it's not obvious, even if it's not me acting all nervous or something, but if there's something in there, people are sensitive and they can just say, well, there's something, I'm just not sure. The course sounds great. Your work sounds amazing, but it's not quite right. And so I have to take some of that responsibility. It may not be right for you for any number of reasons, but part of that could be what you're getting from me is not just me, the teacher, not just me, the mentor, not just me, the giver. It's also me, the, oh,
Man, that is such a good point. Um, a couple of sort of practical things for people around that. One is the research by, do you know Jamie Pennebaker, um, out of
just by name, but not, I don't know.
yeah, yeah. I met him at one of those the Hilton Head Mind Body Medicine conferences, and I'm bummed. I sat at the same table as him, and I didn't realize anything about him until after the conference was done. I'm like, I would have loved to have learned more about his research from him. So he, for listeners or viewers, he's done some amazing research on the power of journaling as a way to heal from trauma. And one of the studies that he did, he and his colleagues, was they took people who had gotten laid off. There's like a bunch of managers from like I guess it was all the same company. And the control group just did basic, resume, et cetera, kind of stuff. And the other group journaled about like how they were feeling, how they were doing. And the group that did journaling did unbelievably better in terms of uh, landing on their feet and getting a new job than the other ones. And I'm sure it's a major reason is exactly what you were saying. That they had like worked through any of the hurt, resentment, shame, whatever. And so they weren't putting out maybe like desperate vibes or like subtly or not so subtly resentful vibes about what had happened to them. So, you know, back to your point, both that point and then your earlier story about the healing process, how important it is to not avoid that. And it's so wild. This is part of what I love about our conversation. It's like the synchronicities because you're mentioning about the healing process. As I was going for a walk before we did this, I was thinking about that graduate school experience and I intentionally mentioned about compartmentalizing when I was sharing it with you, because as I was going on my walk, I thought, on one hand, that was really tactically good that, part of my coping mechanism from my childhood was how to compartmentalize, like shut off that pain and like plow ahead. Even though tactically that helped me not get immobilized, as I was going for my walk, I was thinking, I, it's been so long, I don't remember how much I addressed the grief about giving up on that identity. Um, but I imagine back then I probably didn't spend a whole lot of time on it and and how important it really is, especially later in life, for people to for us to give ourselves permission to grieve that, like, I'm not that thing I over identified with. And I love that you said about you recognize when it was time to leave heart math. It sounds like you didn't over identify with like your totality was the CEO of heart math. You didn't just know intellectually, you knew in your body you were so much more than that. It sounds like that.
Yeah, yeah, and that comes a lot because even before heart math, I had a certain type of spiritual practice, whether that was doing yoga, meditating, where I knew there was a source within me, independent of a role, whether that was actor, whether that was vice president of marketing for a nutrition company, whatever the role was. And of course, the fact that I used to even have roles was kind of helpful, I think, in the helping think this through. Okay, I had a role as an actor and a singer and a dancer for several years. I loved it. I was really good at it. And now I'm kind of getting rid of that. But then I realized, okay, there just continue to be roles, and we can continue to identify with things as though that's us and the job. And the identity with heart math remains to this day. I haven't worked there formally and full time for 14 years, almost 13 and a half years. But I was so involved, not just with the role of CEO, which I was that for less than half of the time, but the whole identity of helping create such an organization is all about serving the world and serving humanity, and it's about the heart. I mean, who wouldn't want to identify with something like that, right? And there was, after I was no longer CEO, there were some obvious things where, oh, I'm not CEO anymore. There were certain perks, not like red carpets and limousines and all that kind of stuff all the time, nothing like that. But there was a certain acknowledgement from the world, especially people who were hearing about HeartMath. Oh, and you're the CEO. Oh, okay. You want to come speak at our conference? And then suddenly I'm not HeartMath CEO anymore, and those calls go to the organization, not to me. So yeah, so there's all that I was dealing with too. But I think just to pick up on this other point about the kind of the emotions of reinvention, and this is, we could do easily a series just on this dimension of it, but I want to touch on it because, like I said earlier, anxiety builds up in all of us for different reasons. The reinvention question, often there is a component that is financial, and if not financial, it's identity. or sometimes it's both. It's kind of like, how can I be anything but? I've gotten accolades for this. I wanted to like you. I think about my brother similarly. When he was a boy, he wanted to be a doctor. He was president of the Future Doctors Club at the high school. He's been a doctor his entire life. He's 81, still identifies completely as a doctor. And not completely. He's a beautiful man. He's a beautiful father, beautiful grandfather. But so much of the identity still is what he has wanted to be ever since. And I think there are some people that's their destiny. I, on the other hand, like, what are you exactly? Well, what day is it? Today I'm a podcast uh, participant. So, but I just to address this issue, because I think the people can be afraid of the anxiety, they can be afraid of fear associated with the reinvention. And so, like, even as we're bringing this up, some people are like, they're talking about negative feelings here. Yeah, because it comes with the territory. The fact that you're even thinking about reinvention is because you got some unhappiness. There's something that's not working right. It may be just the job, but oftentimes it's more than just that. There could be other elements of your life. In my case, my whole life was changing. I had lost my mother, even though that had been a long decline leading up to her passing. Everything kind of was changing. So there's this destabilization that's going on where where's my anchor anymore? And if we've had too much of our emotional identity, our emotional satisfaction tied to the job, then there can be a lot of destabilizing feelings. They're like, whoa, this is not feeling good. So I have come to learn in my book studies initially from HeartMath, but then a lot that I've looked into since then, that humans, we build up anxiety, we build up fear, things happen in our life. And these days, more reasons than ever. No matter where you are in the world listening to this, watching us chat, there's probably rising levels of anxiety wherever you are for many, many different reasons. And part of what we've learned is that the human system is designed to release that. There's a mechanism built in to allow us to release that. Athletes intuitively know this. They go, right before a race. They go, right before they're about to shoot a basket from the free throw line and the game's on the line. Right before they begin the swimming race. Right before the gymnast does her routine across the mat. There's a distinction. You got to let go before you can perform at your best. Most of us don't have a habit to actually do that through a day, to actually let go. Sigh of relief, they call it. Just letting go. But we have to do that. And what I've learned so much, starting with the HeartMath research, is that these negative feelings that we're otherwise storing without a release, every day we wake up maybe to some anxiety, and then things happen through the day that kind of confirm the fear, confirm the anxiety, and now a little bit more is added. And these are not just abstract things that are happening. A stress trigger, just feeling, just right now, people are watching this video and they're getting an alert on their computer or on their phone, and the alert is bad news, or it's got the name of somebody sending them a text, like, like just seeing the name. It's like, it's the boss. And that moment of the trigger is a biochemical change of around 1,400. You know this, about 1,400 biochemical changes happen in that moment when you feel threatened. It's him. Oh no, what's that going to be? And now suddenly you're completely preoccupied. And what's the guy on the screen talking about now? I've completely lost track of them. Got completely preoccupied with the boss who just texted me. But what's also happened inside you, 1,400 biochemicals. And that's not the only time you got triggered today. That's just one notable one. But then there's probably been kind of throughout the day a number of things. You say an alert on your bank account. Your account's dropped under, let's say, like, oh no, like I know it's below that number. I did not need a reminder. So anyway, my point being, we now live in a world where we constantly reminded of things to be anxious about, and that has a biochemical impact on our bodies. And therefore how we're presenting to the world, to a potential employer, to friends. And so the beauty of it is we have this mechanism to let go. And as we learned with HeartMath, the more we can be grateful for any little thing in life, that helps to reset our system out of the trigger because we saw the boss's name show up as a text message. It helps to reset our system back to a more positive state, the state you want to be in as you're pondering the reinvention. You want to be thinking about how amazing my life will be when I find the thing that really matches me better than where the situation I'm in now. That's what you want to be more focused on. It's natural to not be there because of the things that pull us back, because we live in a world that's full of anxiety producing situations. So I just wanted to emphasize that the good news in all this is that there are fairly simple things. Doing a sigh of relief, just letting go as often as you need to do that. You are a biochemical factory going on in there, and a lot of the biochemicals are produced as though we were in life and death danger, and we're not.
Got
So
it.
we've got to shift that. We've got to let go of some of that anxiety that does build up, and we have to add more of the gratitude for this is the first day in probably six. The sun has come out. We've had a lot of intense rain here in the Bay Area, high winds, flooding. It's been pretty intense, and there is sun coming out right now. I am very grateful. When we're done talking, I'm going to go sit in the sun for a little bit.
Awesome.
Little moments of gratitude.
So the exhale, um, doing gratitude practice. Also, we talk about the biology, like what animals do. There's also that shaking, like anybody who has a dog, you see your dog shake.
Yeah.
That's when animals like reset their nervous system. Um,
And that relates to doing anything for that matter, that like going for a run and like kind of doing a bit of a sprint, because that kind of shakes it out. As you know, I'm a dancer. So I could be in a terrible mood and put on a song that I love and, oh, I got to move. And that starts feeling really different than the kind of stuck tight, because these stressful emotions make us feel tight. They're not opening us up. They're hunker down, be careful, be careful. There's threat everywhere, you know.
you got it. So that's also another practical strategy for folks. If people haven't watched Amy Cuddy's TED Talks, definitely suggest watching them. I love sharing the research where scientists had people do, I think it was a mock interview, it was not a real job interview, but a mock interview, and how one group, before they went in, got into kind of collapsed in on themselves, like sort of
Mm,
semi-fetal position. And the other group did what she calls the Wonder Woman pose, like standing up, hands on your hips, feet shoulder width apart.
mm,
So a powerful pose. And they did it for 2 minutes. And not only was a group who did the Wonder Woman pose rated as more confident, but also when they did back to the biochemistry of emotion, when they did blood draws, the people with the power pose had higher testosterone level and lower cortisol level.
mm,
So just 2 minutes of an empowered pose shifted their biochemistry, and high testosterone, low cortisol is, the biochemical profile of calm assertive. So real strong leaders have that combo. So so shifting your posture, moving with a more, confident kind of mode also for folks. Also, one of the things that we had talked about, hey, let's talk about this when we record, was the wonderful world of self-talk and the stories we tell ourselves, because that's such a powerful strategy for dealing with anxiety. And so, just real quickly, I'll just say a little bit, and then love for you to do a little bit of riffing too. So, of all the techniques on stress management, building resilience that I've learned and practiced over the years, I think challenging unproductive self-talk and unproductive stories, that combo has been among the most, like, I'll just say like top three or top five. And so two things for people to be thinking about are, especially when you're in that unknown phase, is to beware of what's called fortune telling combined with catastrophizing,
Mm,
where so fortune telling is when we tell ourselves we know what's going to happen, as opposed to like war gaming or strategizing what might happen and how I'll deal with it. And so, oh, I know I'll never find another job that I like would be example of fortune telling combined with catastrophizing. So it's not, oh, I'm going to find my dream job. People, that's not the kind of fortune telling people do. So challenging, like when we're telling ourselves thoughts about the future and how horrible it is, to recognize that's crazy thinking, that's fortune telling and catastrophizing, and what would be a more useful thing to be telling myself. And it's funny, one of the things related to that was um, amusing for me was I remember reading one of Martha Beck's books, and she was talking about dealing with fear. And she said something about, have you ever had the fear that you're going to end up a bag lady or a bag man? Sorry, not impressed. Everybody at every workshop I do has that fear. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not the only one here. And so like that's sort of
I'm
like
uniquely bad. I'm uniquely cursed.
exactly. And it's like that's kind of the ultimate, fortune telling, catastrophizing. So that's one thing. And then the other related to the stories we tell ourselves, just to pay attention to, number one, recognize that we're meaning making creatures, that life just is life, and whatever meaning we have about it or how we explain it, that's just stuff we're making up. It's not a fact. It's just a story, and that's fine. That's part of human nature. That's how humans learn to navigate the complex, scary, unknown world that we evolved into. So not to put ourselves down for like telling ourselves stories. It's just asking ourselves, is this story useful? And then, I mean, there's a process for it, but developing the skills to challenge the negative story and then ask, what's a more useful story to tell myself? So, like in your situation, um, uh, with let's say leaving heart math. So a person could have the story, I'll never find another job, that will fit me like that heart math did for so many years. And then maybe like, what's wrong with me that it's not working for me anymore? And I've got to find something because I'm in my 50s and it's hard to like get another job. That's not a particularly useful story versus the story that you told yourself that enabled you to be strong in that unknown space. So challenging the stories we tell ourselves, and I just recommend people just Google, you know, challenging the stories you tell yourself for all kinds of, material on that, and then watching out for mind reading and catastrophizing. Um, what anything you want to say about that whole realm
Yeah,
that's worked for you?
I think that's super super important. The stories, and in my own experience, and this is partly because I know on the spectrum of emotional sensitivity for men, I'm all the way on the highly sensitive. So many things can bring me to tears and make me laugh. Luckily, I can laugh at myself on a regular basis. I'm highly entertained by my weird thoughts and weird actions sometimes. But the degree of emotional sensitivity is partly why I'm what I'm going to say what I'm going to say, which is that to me, there is this dimension in all of us where the stories are arising out of different emotional states. So the reason we get stuck in certain stories is that there's this relentless anxiety that feeds those kind of stories. And then, as Doc Schulte, the founder of HeartMath, used to say, and then the cousins show up, meaning the cousin thoughts that are similar, that are more negative thoughts. Like they chain link around. They're like cousins of each other. All negative thoughts to reinforce this is never going to work out. Here we go. The other shoe is going to drop now. These things never work out. All those things that get told, but I also always want to look for myself. What's the underlying emotional state that I'm not dealing with? That's the perfect bed, the perfect garden for the negative thoughts to grow. So I've got to be shifting the emotional state, or those thoughts are going to keep coming up. And it doesn't mean we can't address them in all the ways that you just said. And journaling to me is a huge aspect of this, because what's happening in journaling, you're very aware of what you're feeling. The problem is when we're not aware of what we're feeling and we're just trying to deal with too much at the thinking it's all just about the thoughts. No, there's an underlying emotional fear usually, or insecurity or anxiety that's feeding and keeps giving more. So you might get one done, but then another one, like whack-a-mole, another one pops up because there's still too much anxiety, and you're not able to just go, just relax, just bro. Like, this is me talking to myself, bro, chill, dude, come on, you know better. Dude, come on. You have survived two, not just one, two life-threatening conditions. And you're gonna let this take you out. Really? Like, I have to kind of like, hey, wake up, man. Sometimes we need to do that with ourselves. But again, it's to get it, not just get at the underlying state like it's some deep psychological pattern. No, it's energy that needs to get shifted. We're used to it. One of my old friends from HeartMath used to call it our favorite bad feeling, a default that we go to, like a lingering anxiety, a lingering feeling of when's the good time going to end? When will I be revealed as the imposter that I am? And I was just lucky to get that position in HeartMath, but I'm really not any of those things. Those are the thoughts, but they spring out of an emotional state that we can shift. And the more we shift it, the more we shift out of that, we realize I keep recreating that state. No wonder I keep having those negative thoughts. When I move those things along, take them out to sea, be gone. But at the same time, appreciate, wow, it's really sunny out there. I can't wait to sit outside. It looks like spring. There are things actually blossoming. Those moments, you're shifting into a different state, which trigger different types of thoughts.
Man, that I think that might be a great place for us to start to wind down, because it kind of goes back to something we talked about the first conversation, recorded conversation about the don't believe everything you think, rather than always having to analyze or intervene at the cognitive level. Develop the skills to shift the state, develop those skills to
Exactly.
shift the physicality.
Exactly.
Uh,
Which is why we listen to favorite music. We want to shift our state, which is why we watch certain shows, because we want to shift our state. We actually already are doing it by certain choices that we make, certain things we want to eat because we want to shift into that state of, oh, that tastes so good. But when it comes to other things like, oh, I can't, no, I'm just an insecure person. I'm sorry. Wait a minute. You're shifting your state all the time by choices that you make. Why did you pick that dress and not the other one? Why'd you pick that suit and not the other one? Because of the state that you were associating, wanting to feel. So we do this instinctually, but it needs to get more conscious, because now we're up, especially in the context of this, we're now up to pretty big life decisions about career, reinvention. And that doesn't mean they should be scary. It's kind of like, oh wow, I'm at a big pivot point in my life. This is wow, this is cool. Has anybody ever done this before? Millions.
Actually, it's again, the synchronicity is so funny because the thing I was thinking about saying as we wind up is the the theme of shifting state. So our thoughts aren't driven by fear, and then thinking about your really cool story about, well, both stories of really stepping into the unknown, made me think of like a closing. And if you want to have a closing recommendation too, like the closing recommendation that popped into my mind for people is ask people in your network if either they've made a big reinvention or they know somebody who's made a big reinvention, because just hearing stories of people who've done it shifts your state, gives you hope, gives you encouragement. Um, that's maybe one last thing I just want to say in terms of like practical strategies for navigating reinvention. Is there a closing thing that, or
That's beautiful what you just said. I would add to that, or my version might be, remember all the things that you learned to do and what you were like before you knew how to do that. So there's a zillion things in your life you now know how to do, and you didn't at some point. And that includes speaking, that includes holding a fork, that includes riding a bike. I mean, all kinds of basic things. Well, that's what you do. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. There's an impulse in you that knows it needs to learn something new because it'll be more fulfilling than what you're already used to doing because you've been in it for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is. There's that. It's an impulse that's a positive impulse. So while the outer trappings is what makes it insecure, because it's like, well, what about the mortgage? What about the kids? What about the college education? That's what makes it insecure. But it's an impulse that is to be honored because we are meant to continue to grow and to continue to live and to continue to blossom, in my humble opinion, having being in yet another major reinvention in my life. But it's growthful. It's like there's certain things in me I had to stabilize at this phase of my life. It's different than being 25. So it's a growth opportunity. So, but that sounds kind of okay. That's kind of new agey. Okay. But I think the main thing is just reflect on how much you have learned your entire life. And this is just another thing to learn. And there's so many things you never knew how to do until you learn. And now you, oh, wow. And if you think there aren't that many things I know how to do, really? Okay, make a list. Get out the journal. Make a list of all the things you now know how to do, which you did not know how to do when you were a baby. And I don't just mean, eat with a fork. I mean, like all the things you have learned, and you have not stopped. Your ability to learn and your ability to grow is not stopped, and that's why you're in this position and why you're even listening to this conversation.
I love that impulse. Um, Best place for people to reach you?
My house, you come on over anytime. Fortunately, I use my actual name on all social media. So LinkedIn is Bruce Cryer, Facebook, Bruce Cryer, Instagram, Bruce Cryer. I have a website cleverly named brucecryer.com. So my email address is brucecryer@gmail. So I'm kind of a one-trick pony.
I love it. And probably for me, soulsatisfyingwork.com. So thanks so much for yet another fun conversation.
This was very fun, David. It's always fun to hang out with you.